I didn't think I'd ever hear the words, "Your mom's been poisoned," come out of a doctor's mouth. But there I was, gripping the cold metal arm of the hospital chair, staring at the pale figure of my mother lying motionless under a tangle of tubes and wires. Her skin had gone a sickly gray, and every shallow breath she took made my stomach twist tighter. The doctor's voice felt distant, like I was underwater, but the words he used stuck in my head like glass: arsenic in her system. Someone had done this on purpose. I didn't know it yet, but this was the start of something that would shake our entire town, and end with me holding the keys to the very thing every single house here depended on. But in that moment, all I could feel was a mix of fury and disbelief. My mom was one of the kindest people alive. She baked cookies for new neighbors, shoveled snow for the elderly without asking for payment, and even forgave people who wronged her. Who could possibly want to hurt her? The detective asked me question after question: what she'd eaten, where she'd been, who she'd talked to. Then came the detail that changed everything. My mom's illness started 3 days after she'd had a very public argument with our HOA president, Patricia Holloway, though most people just called her Karen. And trust me, she had earned that nickname 1,000 times over. Karen ran the Willow Creek HOA like a personal kingdom. She fined people for leaving their garbage cans out for too long, which meant more than 20 minutes, she sent letters about lawn grass being too yellow, and she patrolled the neighborhood like a hawk. But with my mom, it went further. Karen had been trying to get her to stop feeding stray cats near our yard, saying they were lowering the property value. My mom told her they were living creatures that deserved kindness, not cruelty. That fight ended with Karen saying something that still chills me: "If you don't stop, you'll regret it." Now, 3 days later, my mom was in a hospital bed fighting for her life. I sat there in that room, her hand limp in mine, my mind spinning. The police weren't saying much, but I could tell they suspected someone had tampered with something my mom consumed. The thing was, the only thing she'd eaten that I hadn't was a pitcher of lemonade at the last HOA community meeting. A meeting Karen had hosted. Before I could think about it more, my phone buzzed. It was my neighbor, Tom. His voice was low, almost trembling. You need to come see something. It's about Karen." I drove over, my hands gripping the wheel so tight I thought I'd crack the leather. Tom met me at the end of his driveway and led me into his garage. He pulled out a small cardboard box, and inside were 3 sealed glass jars filled with a cloudy yellowish liquid. "That's water from my tap," he said. "I ran it through a test kit. It's contaminated. And I think Karen knows." My heart dropped into my stomach. Water. It was in the water. My mind flashed back to my mom pouring herself a glass from the kitchen sink just hours before she got sick. That's when it hit me like a punch: if this was true, it wasn't just my mom. Everyone in Willow Creek could be drinking poisoned water. And the person who oversaw our HOA also happened to have a seat on the board of the local water company. I knew then that this wasn't just about my mom anymore. This was bigger. Much bigger. But at the time, I had no idea how deep this was going to go, or how far I'd have to go to make it right. 3 months earlier, life was normal. Or at least, our version of normal. Mom and I lived in a modest but cozy single-story house at the end of Cedar Lane. The neighborhood was the kind of place you'd think was peaceful from the outside: flower beds, kids riding bikes, and friendly waves between neighbors. But beneath the surface, the HOA made sure no one ever forgot the rules. We'd moved in 6 years ago after my dad passed away, looking for a fresh start. At first, things were fine. My mom's warm personality won over most of the neighbors. She'd bring fresh pies to the annual HOA potluck and volunteer to help with decorating for the Christmas parade. But as time went on, she started to see the cracks in the so-called community spirit. Like the time Karen tried to fine the Jeffersons $500 because their front door was painted the wrong shade of blue. Or when she reported Mrs. Walsh for having a basketball hoop in her driveway. It wasn't about community, it was about control. Still, my mom kept her head down. She figured that if she followed the rules and kept to herself, Karen would have no reason to bother her. That all changed the day the first stray cat showed up in our yard. It was a small, thin tabby with a limp. My mom left out a bowl of food and some water. The next day, another cat came. Then another. Soon, it was a little parade of furry faces waiting at our back porch. My mom didn't see a problem, she was helping animals in need. But Karen saw it as an infestation. One morning, I came home from my early shift at the diner and found Karen in our backyard, standing with her hands on her hips, glaring at the cats. My mom was standing in front of them like a human shield. "You can't keep doing this," Karen barked. "They're hungry," my mom replied calmly. "What do you expect me to do, let them starve? They're pests. They'll ruin the neighborhood. They're living beings, Patricia. If you can't see the value in kindness, maybe you're the one ruining the neighborhood." That's when Karen's face twisted into something ugly. She leaned in close and hissed, "If you don't stop, you'll regret it." From that moment, something in the air changed. Karen started nitpicking everything about our property. Our mailbox needed repainting, the hedge wasn't trimmed to regulation height, even our porch light was too bright. The fines started arriving in the mail. But my mom didn't back down. If anything, she doubled down on feeding the cats. And that's when the subtle threats started: anonymous notes in our mailbox, strange cars parked near our street at night, and once, a dead fish left on our porch. Then came the HOA meeting. It was the middle of summer, and the community center was packed. The air was thick with the smell of lemonade and the hum of small talk. Karen stood at the front like a queen addressing her subjects. My mom and I sat near the back, trying to blend in. Halfway through, Karen made a pointed remark about certain residents disregarding community health by attracting vermin. My mom spoke up, her voice steady but firm. "If you mean me, Patricia, at least have the courage to say my name." The room went silent. Karen smiled sweetly. "I don't need to say names. Some of us just know better than to bring problems into our neighborhood." That's when a volunteer passed around pitchers of lemonade. My mom poured herself a glass. I didn't drink any, I'd brought my own water bottle. Looking back now, that decision might have saved my life. 3 days later, she collapsed in the kitchen. And now, standing in Tom's garage staring at those jars of yellow water, I realized something terrifying: this wasn't just an HOA feud anymore. This was war. And Karen had just made the worst mistake of her life. Tom's face was pale as he screwed the lid back onto the jar. I tested 3 separate taps in my house. All of them showed traces of arsenic. Low amounts, but enough to make someone sick if they drink it regularly. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. "Have you told the police?" He hesitated. I don't trust them. The HOA's got friends everywhere. And Patricia's brother-in-law? He's the operations manager for Willow Creek Water Company. You think they'll blow the whistle on their own? That sentence was like a match to gasoline in my mind. The HOA wasn't just patrolling lawns and paint colors, they had their fingers in the water supply. That meant control. And control was exactly what Karen thrived on. We stood in the garage for a long time, the smell of motor oil mixing with the metallic scent from those jars. My hands curled into fists. If this water was tainted, it meant my mom wasn't the only victim. It meant every family, every child, every elderly person in our community was at risk. And if the people who were supposed to protect us were in on it, then we were alone. That night, I barely slept. I sat by my mom's hospital bed, listening to the monitors beep steadily, thinking about the timeline. She'd had that lemonade at the HOA meeting, and now I knew, lemonade was just water, sugar, and flavoring. The source wasn't the drink, it was the water itself. But why? Why poison the neighborhood you live in? Then it clicked. If you control the water, you control the people. Imagine threatening to shut off someone's supply unless they pay fines, sell their house, or toe the HOA line. And if they refused? Well, the water would mysteriously become unsafe. The idea was so twisted it made me shiver. The next morning, I decided to play it smart. I went to the community center to check the lost and found, but really, I wanted to look for anything that connected Karen to the water company. I found a bulletin board near the entrance, announcements, event flyers, and one laminated sheet with a list of HOA committee members and their community roles. There it was in black and white. Patricia Holloway, HOA President/Willow Creek Water Company. Board Representative. It wasn't proof of poisoning, but it was proof of power. I was about to snap a picture when I heard the sharp click of heels behind me. Lose something? I turned slowly. Karen stood there in a perfectly pressed blazer, holding a paper coffee cup. Her eyes were locked on me like a snake watching a mouse. Just checking the board, I said evenly. Her smile was all teeth. Curious little habit you have. Always poking around where you don't belong. Kind of like breaking into people's backyards to yell at them about cats. I shot back before I could stop myself. Her smile didn't fade, but her eyes hardened. You should focus on your family right now. Wouldn't want to get distracted. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. Water can be unpredictable, you know. Sometimes it cleanses. Sometimes it destroys. Every muscle in my body wanted to lunge at her, but I forced myself to stay still. She was baiting me. If I lashed out, she'd use it against me. Karen brushed past me, her perfume sharp and chemical, and walked out the door. I stood there staring at the empty space she'd left, my hands trembling. She'd just as good as admitted it, without saying it. Less extreme event or not, that moment cemented something in my mind. I wasn't going to the police, not yet. I was going to dig. And when I had enough, I'd take her down so completely she'd never recover. That afternoon, Tom came over with a stack of old HOA newsletters. I've been collecting these for years, he said. Thought you might find something. We spread them across my dining table. Buried between landscaping tips and holiday reminders were little notes, mentions of water conservation penalties, infrastructure fees, and even hydration compliance. It was clear they'd been using water rules to squeeze money out of people for years. But in the most recent issue, there was something that made my stomach twist, a cheerful announcement about a partnership between the HOA and Willow Creek Water Company to ensure quality control. It was dated just a month before my mom got sick. I was still staring at that page when a knock came at the door. I opened it, and froze. Two uniformed men stood on my porch. One held a clipboard, the other had a tool bag slung over his shoulder. Afternoon, the first one said. We're here to inspect your water meter. HOA request. My mind screamed trap. And that was the moment I realized the next extreme event was already here, standing right in front of me. I stepped onto the porch, blocking the doorway so the two men couldn't see inside. My water meter's fine, I said flatly. The man with the clipboard gave me a polite but forced smile. Just routine. Should only take a few minutes. Routine? I raised an eyebrow. Funny, because in 6 years of living here, no one's ever shown up for a routine meter inspection. That's when the guy with the tool bag spoke up. His tone was sharper. We have authorization from the HOA. We can come in if we need to. Every instinct I had told me letting them anywhere near my pipes was a bad idea. If Karen really was trying to control who got clean water, messing with my meter would be the perfect move. Maybe they'd cut me off entirely. Maybe they'd accidentally increase the contamination. Either way, they weren't stepping foot in my house. "I don't care what paper you have," I said, my voice low but steady. "This is my property, and you're not touching a thing without a warrant. You get one of those, we can talk." The clipboard guy shifted uncomfortably. Tool bag guy just stared at me for a few seconds, like he was measuring whether I'd back down. Finally, he exhaled sharply through his nose and jerked his head toward the street. "Fine. We'll report you as non-compliant." They walked off without another word. I watched from the window until they got in their truck and drove away. But my relief didn't last long. I knew this wasn't over. If they couldn't get into my home openly, they'd find another way. That night, I set up an old motion-activated security camera near the side of the house where the water meter sat. If anyone so much as breathed on that thing, I'd know. The less extreme part of the day came later, when I stopped by the hospital again. My mom was awake for the first time in 2 days. Her voice was weak, but she managed to smile. "You look tired, honey." I sat by her side, trying to keep my voice light. "Been busy. Just keeping things running at home." She squeezed my hand. "Don't let them push you around. People like that, they only win when good people give up." It was such a simple thing to say, but it grounded me. Reminded me why I was doing this. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about making sure no one else went through what she was going through. I stayed with her until she fell asleep, the steady beep of the heart monitor almost hypnotic. When I finally headed home, the streets of Willow Creek were quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. I pulled into my driveway, grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, and started toward the house. That's when I noticed it, my security camera, lying on the ground, its lens shattered. Someone had been here. I sprinted around to the side of the house, and my stomach dropped. The water meter was open, the metal cover tossed aside like it weighed nothing. A new, unfamiliar valve had been installed, something that definitely hadn't been there this morning. Before I could process it, I heard the faint hiss of running water from somewhere underground. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I ran inside, turned on the kitchen tap, and nothing came out. They hadn't just come to inspect my water. They'd shut me off completely. That's when I realized, this wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was open war. I stood in my kitchen staring at the dry faucet, the silence louder than any noise I'd ever heard. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the kind of rage that makes your chest burn. They'd actually done it. Cut me off. In the middle of summer. In a neighborhood where the HOA preached about community values, while their president poisoned my mom and now left me without running water. I grabbed my phone and called Tom. He picked up on the second ring. "They shut me off," I said without preamble. He cursed under his breath. I knew they'd try something, but this fast? They didn't even try to hide it. Broke my camera and tampered with my meter. Tom's voice dropped to a near whisper. "They're testing you. Seeing if you'll roll over. If you don't fight back, they'll go after someone else next." That was the moment I decided, no more waiting, no more collecting scraps of, maybe, evidence. I was going to find something solid enough to bury Karen and her entire little empire. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. Most people in Willow Creek didn't even know it existed, but I'd been here once before when we bought the house. The place smelled like old paper and dust. Rows of file cabinets stretched in every direction. It took hours of combing through public records, but eventually, I found what I was looking for, minutes from a county utilities meeting 2 years ago. Buried in the fine print was an approval for a private operational agreement between Willow Creek Water Company and the HOA. And who had signed off on it? Patricia Holloway. The agreement gave the HOA discretionary oversight over residential water accounts in cases of non-compliance with community bylaws. Which meant, legally, they could shut off water for any reason they decided counted as non-compliance. It didn't prove poisoning, but it explained the power they were abusing. The less extreme part of the day came in the form of a surprise ally. As I was leaving the records office, a man in his late 40s stopped me in the parking lot. He wore a faded baseball cap and carried a battered briefcase. "You're the one asking about the HOA water deal, right?" he asked. I froze. "Depends who's asking." He handed me a folded piece of paper. "Name's Dean. Used to work for the water company. Patricia got me fired when I questioned some of her policies." "That paper?" "It's a list of people who've had their water mysteriously shut off in the past 2 years. Might be useful to you." When I got home, I unfolded the paper. 20 names stared back at me. Most of them were the same people Karen had feuded with in HOA meetings over the years. It was a hit list, and my mom's name was at the bottom. I was still staring at it when my phone buzzed. It was Tom again, his voice tight with panic. "Get over here right now. You need to see this." I drove to his house in record time. He was standing in his driveway holding a garden hose in one hand and a bucket in the other. "Look," he said, turning the hose on. Instead of clear water, a cloudy, brownish stream gushed out. The smell hit me immediately, metallic and foul, like rust and something chemical mixed together. "Just tested it," Tom said grimly. "The contamination's worse. And it's not just my place. 3 other neighbors called me about the same thing this morning." I looked up and down the street. Sprinklers sputtered, faucets dripped, and I realized exactly what Karen was doing. She wasn't just targeting people individually anymore. She was sending a message to the whole neighborhood. And I was going to make sure that message backfired in the worst possible way for her. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Dean's list spread out in front of me, Tom's water sample sealed in a jar beside it, and my laptop open. If Karen wanted to play dirty, then I was done playing fair. I started by calling every single person on the list. Some numbers were disconnected, but most answered, and almost all of them had the same story: water shutoffs, sudden contamination, or mysterious infrastructure fees charged right after they had a dispute with the HOA. The pattern was undeniable. One woman, Mrs. Delgado, told me through tears how her husband's dialysis treatments had been interrupted because their water supply failed for 2 days straight. Another man said his garden, which he used to grow food for a local shelter, was destroyed when the water was shut off in the middle of a heatwave. Every story fueled the fire in my chest. The less extreme part came in the form of planning. I wasn't going to the news yet. I wanted my case airtight. I needed one more piece of evidence that could link Karen directly to the poisoning. Dean came through again. 2 days later, he called me from a payphone. "I've got something, but it's risky," he said. "Meet me at the old grain mill tonight, 9 p.m. And come alone." The grain mill was on the edge of town, long abandoned and half covered in ivy. The only light came from a flickering street lamp. Dean was leaning against his truck, a manila folder in his hands. "These are internal water company memos from last year," he said, passing it to me. "They prove Patricia personally approved chemical flushing in targeted residential lines belonging to people on that list." I flipped through the papers, my pulse racing. Some of the memos had her signature at the bottom. Others had typed notes with phrases like, "increase dosage," and, "observe compliance." It was the smoking gun I'd been waiting for. But before I could thank him, a pair of headlights swung into the lot. A black SUV rolled up fast, gravel crunching under its tires. The driver's door flew open. Karen herself stepped out, her expression cold and razor-sharp. "You've been busy," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Collecting things that don't belong to you." talking to people you shouldn't. That's dangerous. Dean stiffened beside me. You don't scare me, Patricia. Her gaze shifted to him, then back to me. You should be more careful who you trust. People have accidents. I took a step forward. If anything happens to him, or anyone else on that list, it's over for you. I have enough to make sure of it. Karen smiled slowly, like she was enjoying a private joke. Oh, sweetheart, you think you're in control? You don't even know who owns the water you're drinking. She turned, got back into the SUV, and drove off without another word, leaving the air heavy with the unspoken threat. I looked at Dean. What did she mean by that? He hesitated, then said quietly, she's not the real owner. The water company's up for sale. Has been for months. And if she's right, he looked at me seriously. Whoever buys it will have absolute control over every drop in Willow Creek. That's when the next extreme event slammed into my mind like lightning. I was going to buy it. The idea sounded insane at first, me, buying the water company. But the more I thought about it, the more it made perfect, ruthless sense. If Karen's entire grip on the neighborhood came from controlling the water, then the only way to truly end her reign was to take that control away. I spent the next week working non-stop. I liquidated savings, sold my old truck, even convinced a distant cousin to loan me the rest. Dean introduced me to a lawyer friend who specialized in fast acquisitions. And then, in a quiet county courthouse with barely a handful of witnesses, the deed was signed. The Willow Creek Water Company was mine. It took less than 24 hours for word to spread. The HOA board called an emergency meeting to discuss critical infrastructure changes. I went. I didn't just go, I walked in wearing the same steel expression Karen had worn the day she threatened me in the community center. Karen was mid-sentence when I stepped to the front of the room. Actually, I said, there's a new policy regarding water supply in Willow Creek. Effective immediately. Karen blinked, clearly irritated. And who exactly do you think you are to? I tossed a folder onto the table in front of her. The deed. My name in bold print at the top. Her face went pale. This is a joke. No joke, I said, my voice steady. I own the water company now. Which means your compliance shutoffs and increased dosages are over. In fact, I turned to the rest of the board, HOA operations will no longer have any authority over water distribution, period. The room erupted into murmurs. Karen's jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. I leaned closer to her, my voice low enough only she could hear. You poisoned my mom. You threatened my neighbors. And now, you have nothing. Not control, not power, nothing. The wild part came next. I had planned to just strip the HOA's control, but as I walked out, I caught sight of a crowd gathering outside the building, neighbors holding jars of cloudy water, copies of Dean's memo, and printed pages of that list. Word had gotten out. The crowd pushed into the meeting hall, shouting for Karen's resignation, demanding an investigation. Phones were out, recording every second. Karen tried to speak, but every word was drowned out by chants of out. 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 The sheriff himself arrived within the hour, not to arrest the crowd, but to escort Karen and the board members out under protective custody while the county opened a criminal case. By the time I got home that night, my phone was blowing up with messages of thanks from people all over the neighborhood. But the best moment came when I walked into the hospital room and told my mom the news. She was sitting up now, color back in her cheeks. When I told her Karen had lost everything, she smiled the widest smile I'd seen in months. Sometimes, she said softly, kindness wins. Sometimes, you just have to fight for it. I squeezed her hand. And this time, we fought with water. The next morning, clean, safe water flowed into every home in Willow Creek, except one. Karens.